Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Richa Agarwal, CEO, Imami Art and Kolkata Center for Creativity. Like you must have all heard, we're very excited about the whole series of talks and mentorship programs that we've been having. It's given a lot of perspective to me personally because it started with a very simple conversation which Ushmita and me were having about, I'd say, sometime March beginning, just when the lockdown was kind of, we knew in the air that there's going to be a lockdown soon, but wasn't announced. And we were looking at how to stay positive and grow positively creative at this time. At that point of time, we really didn't realize that this would be so rewarding to us as individuals. We were looking at uh, a younger age group which sometimes needs an anchor, and which we, uh, kind of feel ki after an X age, you have it naturally. Trust me, it doesn't happen. For us, it's been rewarding continuously to be learning every day and understanding. And the beauty of this experience is that we have the additional time to even understand because we're not in a rush to get somewhere. So I'd like to thank every speaker. I'd like to thank Ushmita for moderating, coordinating this event. I'll ask
Uh,
Ushmita to take the evening on for us, please.
Thank you, Richa. I think Richa is having some network issues from her end, but we lost some of the things that she said. But she's back, I think, online. But thank you, Richa. And yes, truly, this has been a very a good experience all around for me to be able to work with you and arrange these. And I'm so thankful to all our speakers for agreeing to do this. Thank you, Pushpamala. I welcome you today to the Imami Art Talks Conversation Series 1.2. Um, so let's start the program. It's 4. Pushpamala was born in Bangalore in 1956 and has been called the most entertaining artist iconoclast of contemporary Indian art. In her sharp and witty work as a photo and video performance artist, sculptor, writer, curator, and provocateur, and in her collaborations with writers, theatre directors, and filmmakers, she seeks to subvert the dominant cultural and intellectual discourse. She is known for her strongly feminist work and for her rejection of authenticity and embracing of multiple realities. As one of the pioneers of conceptual art in India and a leading figure in the feminist experiments in subject, material, and language, her inventive work in sculpture, conceptual photography, video, and performance have had a deep influence on art practice in India. Starting off her career as a sculptor, she began using photography and video in the mid-1990s, creating tableau and photo romances in which she cast herself in various roles. Interested in history and the idea of cultural memory, she cites a wide range of references in her series of masquerades, where she simultaneously inhabits and questions familiar frames from art history, photography, film, theatre, and popular culture, thereby placing herself as the artist at the center of social and political inquiry. Pushpamala lives and works in Bangalore after having lived for periods in different Indian cities. She exhibits widely in India and internationally and speaks often at seminars and conferences. So welcome, Pushpamala. The first query that I have before we go on to looking at your work and talking and discussing them is that you mentioned that you moved sometime in the mid-90s, you shifted very fluidly from sculpture to performative photography and video and installations. And I have heard you refer to yourself as an artist who works with photography and video, comparing yourself to filmmakers who work with cinematographers. Could you tell a little about the beginning of your interests in film and photography and the reasons that led to this realignment? And does sculpture still inform your practice today in any way?
Let me start off by thanking you for inviting me, both of you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, this is a question that's asked many times. And it was not that I suddenly switched to photo performance. I was always interested in theatre actually, and even my earliest sort of sculptural works are very theatrical. In fact, I use the tableau form, looking back at it in retrospect, because I didn't know I was using the tableau form at that point from the very beginning, which is a continuity between my early figurative sculpture and the photo performance and video performance work as well. It started simultaneously. I think I was very I thought I reached a sort of dead end with my sculpture around the mid 90s, and it was already changing from strongly figurative work to objects. And this was the time when the post Ram Janmabhoomi and the Babri Masjid destruction and so on, and the riots that followed Bombay. I was living in Bombay at the time, so I started looking at earlier work and started experimenting with new forms because we wanted to find forms which would help us to express the fragmented and the new society which was around us. Yes. So my sculpture again started fragmenting, and I started using the ruin and the fragment in my work, and very kind of flimsy materials like paper, for instance, or like found materials, cheap plastic objects and things like that. But the work was getting more and more kind of minimalistic in form. And I think I was somewhere like, I was not sure whether I was really using all my interests in my work, like, because it was almost as if I was paring away a lot of subject matter. Not subject matter so much as a lot of other elements, like, for example, humor, though it was still there. So the photo performance thing came about almost by accident because I was supposed to do a work for a show on film curated by Arshia Lokanwala. And then I had this idea of dressing up as one avatar of Fearless Nadia, who in fact I'd never seen her films, but I was always interested in her persona and her films without actually seeing them. But this kind of stunt heroine avatar, And so we just, I asked a young friend of mine, Meenal Agarwal, who had just started freelancing, and to for me, and then we went off and to Shireen's house, actually in Bombay, my gallerist's house, and we shot the first few reels. And immediately after that, I moved to Bangalore. I built my studio and I was about to move, and this happened just before that. So when I looked at this material, which I had the contact prints at that time, we were working with darkroom prints, negative film, and it was so interesting. I said, why not? Why just waste it? Why not work on it and build it up into a series of work, a body of work actually. So then I started looking at it and reading up and so on, and there were two kinds of directions there. One was the comic sort of action film kind of thing, which was actually more fun and superficial and so on. And the other thing that sort of images that were there happened to be there were like kind of quite dark, melancholic images. So I decided to work with a film noir style. And I have been interested in film, and I was also married to a film scholar. So we were just, throughout the time we were married, I think he was working on the Encyclopedia of Indian Cinema, which was a huge undertaking and went on for 8 to 10 years. We were seeing 4 films a day, like, of all kinds, in every language, because it included all the languages, language films in the film industries in India. But I was always, when I lived in Bombay, I knew people like Kumar and Nick Cole and all that, and the whole art film sort of circuit. But I was always slightly rebellious. So when I made my work, it was, in a sense, harking back to my own interest in the popular, and also like, again, in a sense, slightly rebellious of this art film thing, aesthetic. So that's how it came about, and it was overlapping. The sculpture and the photography was sort of overlapping because I always take a long time to work on anything. And in fact, I also made my first video around the same time that I started Phantom Lady in 96, and I shot in 96, 97 and 98 at 3 different shoots. And in 97, I was in Australia on a residency, and I made Indian Lady my first video film. It's very brief.
So should we go on to the images then? Then it will be more contextual for our viewers. Just a second. So, yeah.
So, Phantom Lady, besides being different in style, was actually shot on real locations in Bombay. And it's not that I had a big unit or something like that. It was me and my photographer, who was 7 months pregnant at the time we were shooting. She had failed to inform me about that. And I think Chaitanya Samrani was there, as sort of helping me, at that point. So we were just going around. I used to have a wraparound skirt and I had my shorts and the costume underneath, and we carry the cape and the mask and the hat in a bag, and went around Bombay actually shooting in public places, which was scary but very interesting experience.
Right. So in a way, these series are very constructed realities, where these are staged images with fictive characters in imagined situations. And it's almost like a meta image. These photo romances, through these, you highlight sociocultural tropes, archetypes, and stereotypes. So could you talk a little about that conceptual aspect of these works?
Yeah, it started off with, when I shot Phantom Lady, the first shoot, it was just myself posing here and there, And I said there has to be a story, a narrative. So what could the narrative be? So till the 80s, actually, a very popular narrative in Hindi cinema was this Lost Twins, Mela or whatever it was. One was good and one was bad. One was a police man and one was whatever, crook and so on. So that was very interesting because I'm very interested. I mean, in fact, masquerading or performing in the work itself was a kind of alter ego image. And within that, I had these alter egos many times. Sometimes there are two characters. Sometimes there are even 3 and 4 who are like alter egos to each other, and who mirror and echo each other. You'll find that, like, even in my film, like Paris Autumn, for instance, there are 3 characters who are sort of echoing each other or are alter egos.
So, I mean, this idea of the alter ego or the doppelganger or the shadow self or the good and the evil stereotypes, we can almost trace back to the Gothic novels, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And as you truly said, that it's something that we have seen a lot of in Hindi cinema, especially. So, how do you marry these? The language, the visual language of the noir, and these almost dramatic tropes from the Hindi film world.
Mythology, because in fact, some people take from Mahabharata, for instance, the brothers at war and so on, mythological references. But in fact, Meenal, my photographer, asked me. She said, you're dressed up as a stunt actor, and but you're shooting in a completely different style, that is film noir, where actually you should be dressed like a detective. The hat pulled down and the overcoat and all that.
Yeah.
But I felt this costume was far more interesting, because if I was just fully covered and I went out into these kind of public, situations, like I wouldn't make a difference. While if you find this very oddly dressed, theatrically dressed character, flamboyantly dressed, I would say, coming into this kind of public space, it immediately changes the space. And all these, places are shot at, like the Bombay Docks, Lions Gate, this is Flora Fountain, and so on. There's iconic places in Bombay, which are sort of, you find them in every novel. I mentioned so many times, and millions of people pass through it every day. But nobody could recognize those places because of this character in this costume. So I'm playing constantly with these dualities in different ways, where one hits off the other and makes each strange in a sense.
Right. So in a sense, even when you're using the image of the femme fatale, which again is a very westernized trope that has been used in the Hindi film to talk about this dichotomous role that a woman plays in films from the 60s, 70s, where if you dress in a westernized costume, you smoke, or you have alcohol, you are you are the bad woman, versus if you are dressed in a kind of a sari, or you're modest. So that kind of a trope you have used in this Sunehre Sapne, I think,
It's the fantasy of
especially.
housewife
Yeah.
in 90. But it's a westernized, it's not exactly the character is in Western clothes at a certain point, but she's always there as the courtesan figure, you know. So there's this kind of courtesan who's exactly like that, who's an independent woman, you know, who can do what she likes, but she's also outside the social norms in a sense. So
But these, yeah.
and also highly sexualized.
Hmm.
It's very interesting, this kind of, you know, I mean, with the male, it would be the cop and the criminal. But the female, it's usually this vamp. It was not exactly a criminal as such. She could also, like Helen used to play these characters, and she was always sympathetic somehow because she would come in front of the hero when he was being shot and died and so on, you know. So there is a kind of sympathetic element as well. But I think it sort of charges up the story because in Sunere Sapne, if you notice, like every scene actually echoes, each character echoes the other character in a scene, you know. So it's I play with, again, you know, this is what I do to sort of complicate the thing in a way. I mean, on the one hand, I use cliches, but I also mix up genres and mix up these things so that it sort of complicates each thing.
Right. So there's also, in particularly this series, when I look through the images of this series, I find that there's a, you know, kind of a inherent sense of improbability almost, a sort of a private joke which all the viewers may not be privy to, which is heightened by, you know, these two women who look exactly like each other but dress and behave differently. One wears the nightie, which you've called several times in your, which you've called the national uniform, and the other one wears this glittering golden dress with a bouffant, and there's something afoot. But what is it? This area of absurdity and this area of almost a space where we don't really know what is going on. I think that is very interesting. Could you talk about that?
You don't have a logical narrative in any of these things, you know, because there could be different endings as well. Because you could mix up the photographs. In fact, you know, these are cinematic, and many people have asked me, why don't you just shoot a video or in a short film or something like that, rather than making something out of photographs. But as we discuss this later as well, I mean, the photograph is very different from a scene from a film. And since I also make videos, I know how differently I shoot them, you know, shoot each, for instance. For example, like, uh, each in my photo romances, each photograph is loaded and it's complete in itself. There's a whole narrative in itself, like, you know. But the minute you want to sort of film this, I mean, if there's a dance scene, I can't just have a still. Like, I have to be moving around and something has to be happening over there. So it becomes a different way of looking at it and shooting. And then there has to be a narrative. You can't just have a dance scene and stop there. Like, if you see before and after the dance scene, and those images I could mix up also and have it in a different order, they have no connection. So what I do in these, like, you could have one photograph of one character and followed by another scene of another character, you know, which actually don't, these two don't connect at all. But in your head, it connects and it makes a narrative, and everybody understands it perfectly because it, in a sense, there's such cliches in a way, like, you know, which you're used to seeing, but I also transform them.
I think, so this is another series called the Darde Dil. You call it a love story, which is created in an art cinema style with hand painted photos. And I think when we were talking over the phone some time back, I did mention that this particular series reminds me of, you know, television serials that I had seen in the 80s in Doordarshan, especially Bunyad, which depicted, you know, pre-partition Punjab. Uh, so the way you have, way you depict or way you juxtapose these images, and the way you create the almost the theatrical elements within the picture, it kind of foregrounds nostalgia as a tool for foregrounding cultural memory. So can you discuss how you look at nostalgia within your practice?
Well, my work is not at all nostalgic. Actually, I use. I mean, by the way, Sunere Sapne is also hand painted. I like some of these things because they have a very, for example, it's a hand painted black and white photograph looks completely different from a color photograph. In fact, people ask me, what is this? You know, what color is this? Because even in color, there was Eastman color and there was, you know, Fuji color and whatnot. I mean, films and those films of different times. But I have no reference to partition at all in this. In fact, I didn't know what I was going to do. I just had this place, this site, which belongs to Arjun Raina and Gargi Raina's family. I think they must have sold it by now. But when I needed a place to shoot, because this was doing the coach workshop residency in Delhi, and I was just recovering from an accident, so I was limping around, so I couldn't move around too much. So I needed a kind of contained space to shoot in. And I also like shooting and working in different genres, you know. So the first one was like a kind of thriller, you know, Phantom Lady. The second one was something strange, like, you know, like, somebody said a woman breaking down story, something like that. But I wanted to do a love story. I thought I had this glamorous vision that this Haveli was some sort of glamorous thing, and I could do a kind of Umran kind of thing there. So I was thinking of where to hire costumes and all that. And when I went there actually and looked at it, it was a complete ruin. Actually, from the 15th century or something, but I think there was some dispute and no one was living there except the chowkidar, and the whole thing was in a ruin. So then I had to really rejig everything. And so what I did was I took my small camera. I don't actually shoot, but I went there and just spent a week there, going up and down and different places and taking some reference photographs for myself. And actually, the minute I saw it, it reminded me of Mrinal Sen's Kandhar, actually, and which means the ruin. But I also thought, I said, what kind of story can I have in this? And I have to use the architecture because it's so interesting. Then I was reminded of, I said, I'll have a love story. So there's this impoverished family living here, probably a Muslim family, because this was soon after the Gujarat riots. And I wanted to do a Muslim story, but I didn't want to do something very directly referring to the riots and all that. So I said, a love story. Maybe this impoverished sort of Muslim family, and then there's this mother, invalid mother, and this daughter, and she has a love affair. And I said, no, there has to be one more character. So I added the sister, like a Sakhi kind of figure, you know, because otherwise it doesn't work. The narrative doesn't work. And then in my mind was also Loka's story, you know, of this mother and with the 3 daughters. There's I can't remember the name of the play. So that was also a kind of this very domineering mother with the 2 daughters or something like that. So that was one reference I had as well. But yeah, so I, you know, somebody, a Kannada critic, actually, when he saw this work, he said he likes the way I've used the grammar of the architecture. And in fact, that is a very interesting observation because that's what I did, you know, all the shots, for instance. But then I said it has to be like this arty, you know, art film that never, it's a genre and it has certain kinds of rules. And so in this building, there were 2 courtyards and 2 terraces, and there was various kinds of entrances. So what I did was either it was courtyard to courtyard, courtyard to terrace, terrace to terrace, or terrace to courtyard, and also using openings. So the entire thing has a certain grammar in which these characters are placed, and the architecture is used as a character in a certain way.
So how do you create a storyboard beforehand? Do you sketch? Do you you know, pre-plan everything before you do, or is there a sense of the immediate and you know, you do make decisions while you're working?
I do improvise, but I do have a storyboard, but they're just notes, like scene 1, scene 2. I don't like to draw because I like it to be a surprise visually. So over there, like I basically, one looks through the camera and figures out composes the image. This was shot by this other artist, the Egyptian artist, who was also at the residency. So yeah, I told him what I wanted, and I actually, you know, I showed him. I had already taken photographs in my camera of the kinds of shots that I wanted and the views that I wanted. So I showed it to him. But also, what happens is there's always a collaborative thing. So suppose he was standing on the terrace and he was doing something, then he said, "Hey, this looks very interesting." Because I'm in the frame, so I can't look at myself. So he says, "Shall I shoot from here?" So, you know, this looks very interesting. I said, "Please do," you know. So basically it expands. I have a plan, and I said there's a very tight structure when I start off with all my work. But while we're shooting, there are many people over there, and then they all come up with suggestions as well. And so I allow all the suggestions. but I structure it again by editing it very tightly. So that's how that's the process of working actually.
Right. Um, so in Navrasa Suite from 2003, which is part of the Bombay Photo Studio series, I think you worked with the late Jethalal Thakkar, and you've said that this becomes an inquiry into the neglected history of Indian photography. Uh, I mean, how do you collaborate with with a photographer who's known for a particular kind of photographs, and then how does the collaborative part come after you've decided, or does it come before you decide what you want to do?
Yeah, here this was also done during a workshop. This was the Open Circle workshop in Bombay, organized by Tushar and Sharmila. I think that was in 2001 or 2002. And I just started working at that time in photography, very recently. So I just done one or two works. So I had this idea of getting portraits of myself shot in old photo studios in Bombay with, paraphernalia of painted backdrops and so on. So even from Indian Lady, I was interested in the painting backdrop, which later on I start using in Native Women, that whole project. So somebody suggested that there's this place called India Photo Studio, and man J.H. Thakkar, and somebody had organized an exhibition of his photographs in NGMA apparently 1 or 2 years before that. So I just went there to check out it. Before that, I'd been to 2-3 other old photo studios and around Princess Street and all that, and they were very hostile. They thought I was from advertising, and they were behaving. They were not at all like sort of interested in allowing me to photographing me or whatever. So, but Mr. Thakkar was very nice, and first of all, as soon as I entered the studio, it's right next to Chitra Cinema in Dadar, and very close to many of the film studios down the road. It was a lovely studio. It was a Art Deco this thing interior. Entire place was full of these old photographs of the 1950s and 60s stars. What Thakkar, had come moved from Lahore, I think, during partition, and he had set up shop there, and then he became a kind of still photographer and publicity photographer for the Bombay Film Studios. So he used to shoot these publicity stills for the stars, and he had developed this very interesting style of shooting, which in some ways takes off from the Hollywood style of glamour photography. So this Hollywood style also comes out of the expressionist style, which is close to film noir, which uses strong contrast and deep blacks and strong whites and all that, and a certain kind of lighting. But what is very interesting about Thakkar is that, first of all, I don't think he shot much on the sets at all. He would call these people to his studio and set up something over there and cast shadows on the wall and so on, which were very narrative, and shoot. And I said, does this have anything to do with the film? Some of these things, he said, no, nonsense and all that. Sometimes it had nothing to do with the film. He said these people were chores and all that, so they just wanted a kind of publicity shot to be sensational, and so they would ask him to do some kind of thing, and he would do this elaborate lighting and all that. For example, there was this a photograph of a villain, I forget his name, but from the 50s, and who's shown sort of running, holding a gun, with this hat and suit and all that, that typical sort of villain costume of those days. And there's a kind of lot of smoke behind him, as if there's a kind of fire behind him. It's as if he set fire to something and he's running. So I asked Mr. Thakkar, how did you do this smoke effect? Did you have a smoke machine and all that? He said, no, and all that. He said, I made my assistant lie at his feet and smoke a cigarette and blow out smoke, and I literally... That is amazing, Like, for example, this one, Bibhatsa, the shadow on the back of the wall is actually a chair. He had this kind of old chair with him with a carved back. So he just put this light behind the back of the chair, and this fantastic shadow was cast. But I also, some of these things are taken from old film stills, or like, for example, Karuna has obviously from the Pietà, which is not to do with film at all, but Michelangelo's Pietà. Again, as I said, it was soon after the, Gujarat
Right.
that happened. And but at few of his things, I did actually, there's one of Kumari with this kind of cutout at the back, shadow at the back, which I tried to recreate. But the funniest thing was Mr. Khakar was doing completely different kind of photography, and this was done in the 50s and 60s, and we were shooting 40 years later. So he had forgotten actually how to light up, and he did the shape wrong. It was the wrong way around. I got it cut and all that sort of thing, like we did it in the workshop. And so some of these things, cutouts were done by me and brought over there. So it was like he had to recreate this history in a sense, So there I was recreating his history, and he was also recreating that history. And the funny part is, this was also done in two parts. Like during the workshop, I just shot 4 or 5 images. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just started off, and later on I sort of refined it, and I said I will make one set on these trilogy,
Right.
And one on Suite. 1 second. Let me just
No,
finish
sorry.
the sentence. So I developed the Navrasa Suite and this thing later on, So in the beginning, when I was posing for him, he was very irritated. He said, "Why are you posing so dramatically?" Because all the work he was doing at that point was corporate and wedding,
Okay.
photographs with very flat light. So we sort of again collaborated on this.
That's interesting. So coming to the next 2-3 slides, which are, the Paris Autumn that you made in 2006, and Indian Lady, as you mentioned, in 2007. The first video films that you did.
1997.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, 1997. And how do you then translate or change from your interests in photography and then move forward into making videos? And did you approach this as an extension of your photographic practice? And did narrative play a part here as well, as it has played in your photo romances?
Yeah, but my narrative is completely illogical, and it's more to do with the montage of things, which I continue also with the films. See, Indian Lady is just a very simple thing where I sort of do this little dance in front of the painted. Could you show the Indian Lady?
Yeah, sure.
So I do this little dance. This was shot in Perth, by the way. I was also on a residency then. So it was part of this collaborative work which myself and this Australian artist did. So I made 2 videos and he made 2 videos.
And I think you said something about having the backdrop painted by a film poster painter.
Yeah.
It's Haji Ali.
Yeah, so I had this small postcard of the Haji Ali, night scene, and I asked him to paint it. This is about 20 feet, I think. I can't remember the size of this. I don't think I even have it anymore. So I took it along with me to Australia when I was going for I had no idea what I was going to do because I just had this idea, and this is the first time I've used the painted backdrop. So again, like, as you, I think, mentioned during a conversation, you said that all my photographic work are like tableaus. And yeah, I'm very interested in the tableau vivant. And even when I use video or a film camera, actually I don't move it around. It's usually still, and I have this something set up in front, and it's like a tableau. But Paris Autumn actually is not the tableau form at all. It's more cinematic, though it's actually changing its because this is from the lobby card. This is actually a seat from the film. So again, like Phantom Lady, it was a kind of continuation of Phantom Lady. This is a kind of detective kind of thing, but more philosophical because I was, in a sense, exploring the city of Paris, and as an outsider, someone, I think Parul said it's like a kind of, ethnographer coming there to look at the Western capital of culture, and, ethnographer from the non-Western ethnographer coming to look at this. So I used, my whole project was to make a work in Paris using French references to French culture. And in fact, one of the things that ties the whole thing together, it's a stop motion film, 35-minute film made up entirely of still photographs. Also, there were negatives used because digital was just coming in then, and the photographer who was working for me, the young chap, he didn't have a digital camera, so I said okay. So it was very complicated because then I had to scan all the negatives and then edit from them and so on. But also a thriller, and so I use this film noir style here again, and it's Paris mainly at night. And I use several kinds of references to narrate the film in my own way. That is, one was Walter Benjamin's Arcades Project, which is my favorite book, I think. So I took a lot of, it's about Paris, 19th century Paris. So I took his kind of methodology in a sense to look at Paris.
You also mentioned, I think there was a mention of Hoffman's photographs of Paris architecture from the early 19th century as well.
No, that's not really central to the thing. Yeah. Okay. No, it's more like, now you made me forget what I was saying.
No, you were talking about, Walter Benjamin and his work. Yeah.
Editing, so I was talking to this editor of mine in Sankalp in Bombay, and he said, why don't you see Godard? Vivre sa vie, he had Vivre sa vie, and maybe you can get some ideas from there. So in fact, I actually used the structure that Godard uses in Vivre sa vie, which is actually like chapters of a book, and before each chapter, what is going to happen in the next chapter is revealed in a text. So I use a similar sort of strategy over here.
Right. So is the strategy different if we jump to the next slides of the Return of the Phantom, lady, Sinful City, which is almost like a sequel to your blockbuster Phantom Lady Kismat from early on. And you have your friends and fellow artists inhabiting important characters within this narrative. But here the city, as in the other, Paris Autumn, here also the city kind of plays an important role. And you do talk about, mapping the city and the contested sites of historical films and theater. Could you reflect on that a bit?
Yeah, cinema and land. Yeah, this was a sort of a commission work because I was invited by Majlis. By my Madhushree was doing this huge project called Cinema City, and there were architects and filmmakers and artists and all that, and scholars working this whole idea of Bombay as a cinema city. And Archana was curating the arts section, and she invited me to, in fact, she said, why don't you, you've always been wanting to do this sequel to Phantom Lady, so why don't you do this, and you'll have to shoot on cinematic locales. So this was nice because, it would have been very difficult for me to go to Bombay on my own and shoot over there. So Majlis helped me. I wanted certain kinds of sites, and Majlis also suggested some, and they got me permissions to shoot for free, obviously, because the budget was very, very low. And also other people like Shireen suggested Maker City. She knew Manish Maker, who's an art collector. So a lot of, I shot a lot in the old drive-in theater over there, and which has been destroyed, by the way. And in that first shot you showed was in Maker Towers. Yeah, this is in Maker Towers. So this whole new Bombay with the glass buildings. And what was very interesting is I have about 5 or 6 locations I finally shot in. I had many others earlier, but some were not possible to shoot in, and also like others were just repetitive, so I didn't know what exactly I would do new over there. So this was quite compact. But what was interesting was in the first Phantom Lady, it was, I think, more or less like talking about pre-liberalization, where the crime was about smuggling, So all those old films used to be about smuggling, smuggling cars and whatever it is. So the villains probably were of that kind. But here, like all the crime is about real estate. So it's about whatever mining lobbies in the countryside, and it's about real estate in the cities, So I found that each one of these sites that I shot in was contested in some way or the other. For example, this is the drive-in theater, old drive-in theater was going to be pulled down, and I think they're building a new drive-in theater in that place. But there is a problem because it is built on the banks of the Mahi river, and I don't think it's very legal. I don't think they're supposed to build over there. I shot in Dharavi. Dharavi again, like this whole, yeah, okay. I'll talk about this. This is Bharat Mata Theatre. This is an old theatre which is in Lalbagh, in the middle of the mill areas in Parel. And it was actually built, these series of theatres were built, line of theatres were built to entertain the mill workers in the British times. Actually, the earlier name of this was Lakshmi Theatre, and it was changed to Bharat Mata during the Quit India movement. And this again, like the day I was shooting over there, I think the MNS or Shiv Sena were sitting outside protesting because I think there was this whole plan to pull down the theatre. And they said this is the one theatre which has been continuously showing Marathi films and continues to do so till now. And in fact, when I was shooting, the film Natrang had just been released. So in fact, I shot in front, I asked them to, project a song from Natrang, which is about Tamasha Theatre, which is the folk theatre of Maharashtra. So it was so interesting, so all these things are coming into my work. I mean, there is this, textile history, then the cinematic history, then the land use and the theatre and all these things coming in. And what happens, in all these big cities is suddenly, mysteriously there's a fire. So when I'm at these locations, I said, so what is the crime I'm investigating as the Phantom Lady? So I'm going around here and there doing something mysterious, and I'm sort of seem to be investigating something. So what happens is that there's always some old building, many times historical, and then there's a sudden fire. So there's arson, and everyone knows very well that it's not something natural and which is passed off as natural, and then some mall or something comes up over there. So the center of the crime over here is that it's in the projection room, and there's a bomb in the projection room. So of course, it's in a film reel. So my friend Tushar actually made the bomb for me. We made some wires and all that. It looks like a bomb. So I what happens is I first selected these interesting sites and then made a narrative about them. And again, Gorai, there was a kind of the fishing village Gorai. There was agitation over there against an SEZ that was going to come up. And so on. So each, and Dharavi, of course, it's cinematic because after Slumdog Millionaire, it's become a very popular destination for foreign groups to come there and crews to come there and shoot documentaries of Indian poverty. And those people are pretty fed up of it. But also there's this whole redevelopment plan which people have been opposing and so on. So, it's not very obvious when you see that this is the kind of underlying...
So this kind of a layering of, various histories has, especially in this series, the Avega, the Passion, I find there's a lot of this, again, this layering of histories where you narrate the three stories of three women from Ramayana, Surpanakha, Kaikeyi and Sita. And within the language, you use various traditions such as, I think, early 20th century history, Victoriana, Orientalism, as well as early cinema. However, on a deeper level, it refers to also the cultures of violence and archetypes of abduction and rape in mythologies around the world. So, for instance, I think in these two images, one on the right is inspired by Ravi Verma's painting, the Jataiwa. Then on the left, I think you mentioned, was it Poussin's rape of the Sabine women?
All Western artists were obsessed by the way. Even Picasso has done rape of the Sabine women. So every artists in the West from the Renaissance on painting Sabine women.
Can you maybe talk a little about how this series may be seen as a critique of gender roles within cultural and historical narratives? Should I go on to the video first, or would you like to talk first?
No, let me talk about that before the video.
Yeah.
I'll just talk briefly. Actually, this started off from the Ramayana because again I was asked by a gallery to they were having a Ramayana show which finally was didn't happen. But I had got interested in the Ramayana in the meanwhile and started reading up. And one of the main things I read was Ashya Satta's translation of the Valmiki Ramayana, abridged, of course. And very interesting. She again talks about the role of women, which is not very obvious. So I thought I will, since I had been working on sort of feminist subject matter and so on, and also with putting myself in there, I said, let me choose three key women characters and then talk about them. And then choose one important episode which turns the story. So one was, of course, Kaikeyi as the stepmother who banishes Ram to the forest, and she is sort of given this advice by her faithful maid and so on, was a wet nurse. And the second one is, of course, Shurpanaka, who falls in love, who's actually the guardian of the forest, and when she's flying around checking the scene, she sees Rama and Lakshmana, they're very handsome youths, and falls in love with Rama and wants to sort of seduce him or be with him. And then she is punished by her nose and ears and breast also being cut off. And then finally there's the Sita abduction story. So it's strange, when I had my show in Nature Mart, I didn't think of it that way. So Peter said, what is this? What is this thing all about? You know, victims, or like, you know, being sort of tortured and whatever. I never, I've never actually shown a woman as a victim, you know, earlier. So it was quite interesting for me when the whole thing was put together and such very large images as well, and someone could look at it that way. But yeah, so what I do is that it started with some characters, but I always try to expand that, you know. And then when I thought of abduction, see, earlier abduction and rape were the same thing. But the same word was used for both. So rape of the Sabayan women actually meant abduction, and abduction was also a form of marriage, which is on till today. I mean, it may be formalized, but some of the tribal communities have this sort of festival where the boys of one village or one tribe abduct the women of another tribe and take them away. But of course, it's all like formalized, so they're not really abducting as such, but it's also a form, traditionally, of course, of war. It is one of the weapons of war, rape. You know, so I was just thinking of all this, and like if you look at the mythology anywhere in the world, there's always this thing of the rape or abduction of a woman, which changes the story, you know. And again, like, you know, this whole thing of the partition and any riot and all that, it's a very central part of the story in many ways. So yeah, so I just wanted to highlight these, and another very interesting thing is about, just say a bit about the video of Shurpanaka. So why a video for Shurpanaka when the other two series, like the Kaikeyi series and the Sita series, are actually in photographs? But for Shurpanaka, I had to show the cutting of the feature, you know, the nose here. Because you can't show, you had to show the motion because it is so shocking. And what is very interesting is, quite years ago, I've read that in North India somewhere, MP or UP, a man, a kind of rejected boyfriend or lover or aspirant or something like that, cut off the nose of a young girl. And this has happened several times actually. So it's still today, it's going on. And how is it that a woman is not killed, but she's disfigured? Either acid is thrown on her or her features like are disfigured, you know, because the beauty is supposed to be like the hallmark of a woman, you know. So if she loses that beauty, then she's worse than dead, because if she dies, if she's killed, she just dies. Nice. She suffers all her life. You know, so it is all sorts of things were running in my head. So it's not just looking at the past. Whenever I take anything from the past, it's always about this present, you know, and what's happening now. And with Kaikeyi, it was like this whole thing of intrigue and the strange thing, you know, kind of maybe not that the relationship between two women, which may not be like so nice either, you know, may be kind of full of intrigue.
Right. So maybe we can see the video Indrajala's reduction first.
It's silent, by the way.
Just the language in this sometimes reminds me of these early films, Dada Saheb Phalke's Ramayan, where you have these,
Yes. I
small.
really silent film actually. I make a lot of. Though Avega takes a lot from company theatre. I was very interested in company theatre, and so all the costumes and some very directly, like the Ravana's costume is directly from this very famous role by this um, actor called Gubbi Veeranna.
Mhm. What about this? The costume of the character on the left, Shurpanaka's. What kind of a costume is this from?
Up actually.
Sorry, okay. Because I was trying to understand. It does have resonances with some, Kathakali or,
Well,
but it's not exactly that either.
I'm wearing a Kathakali breast mask, which is
Mhm.
borrowed from Bala Nambiar, who's been doing a lot of research on Theyyam and Kathakali. So Theyyam also it's used, I think.
Yeah, exactly. In Thayyam also, especially the feathered face mask.
The figured face mask is a Venetian mask which I bought in Delhi Chandni Bazaar. So it's a cheap
Venetian,
mask. So it's a completely hybrid costume.
yeah, Venetian mask in Chandni Chowk. Yes, then it's definitely hybrid costume. So why silent?
I didn't think it needed a sound. I mean, I'm very interested in sound like Rashtriya Kheer and Paris Autumn. These two videos have excellent sound design, which I worked with the editor to make, and I had very specific ideas about sound. But I don't think everything needs sound. This is not like a feature film or some documentary or something. It's an experimental film.
Mhm.
So I really don't think this loses or would gain anything from adding sound.
Right.
Because sound for me is another thing altogether, is another element altogether.
Mm. Yeah, because the day we were talking with Ranbir, he did mention that sound was very important to him, and he has kind of used it in very nuanced manner. So in a way, you are talking exactly the same thing, but for you, that soundlessness is the sound that you are kind of using, that silence or exploring.
And what I like to do is not use sort of literal sound, I like to make a montage of the sound, like in Paris Autumn, for example, like, you'll see like the sign of the Louvre and there'll be the sounds of machines, at that time, like, grinding machine or something like that. So I don't like the sound to match the action. So then that would have to be designed in a totally different way, but I don't think this actually needs sound. I mean, what would I do for this? Have some kind of slashing sound that would be so literal that would be unnecessary,
Mm.
So be slashed.
You Let's see this first, then I have a question.
Because you can also ask why black and white, why not color, because sometimes I use color in my work, sometimes I use black and white or sepia. And it depends on what the work is, and what it needs.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned this word montage several times, and you also have, I think, in the past, in some of your interviews, quoted Eisenstein's use of montage. So perhaps, after we see this, you could reflect upon that a little. This is Mrugayati, the hunt. So this is again made from still images, I think you said.
Actually, I shot a lot of these still images because I wanted one of her running for the abduction series, But then it just didn't work on its own. And when I saw the whole thing together, I said, like, this will make a nice film. And I didn't take it very seriously. But I remember when I had the show, when I showed it, people were hypnotized. They were just sitting in front of it. And it's very strange. People really like this thing. Though it's very, very simple. It's just like of course, like I've worked on it and edited it in a certain way. This is a fog machine, by the way.
And I think there was some mention of a theater actor from the Company Theatre that inspired this character.
This is, Guppi Veeranna, but he was not playing the role of a thief or something like that. So it's a very interesting, again, hybrid costume because he's got a Victorian sort of velvet thing, frock-like thing. But his head is like a, Yakshagana kind of makeup or a folksy kind of makeup from the Karnataka region. Coastal actually. And he's wearing boots.
Boots. Okay.
So then, Company Theatre is very interesting because they use this very, very hybrid sort of thing. They took from Victorian traveling theatre, but they also added local elements, like for example, Yakshagana or other kinds of theatrical elements, including in the sets and the costumes and the stories themselves. Plus some Parsi theatre elements.
Right. So just quickly looking at these two ethnographic pictures from your ethnographic series, because I kind of wanted to make a connection with one of your good habits video, that this examines the colonial gaze while also calling out the falseness of the supposed truth of forensic classification images. So when you make a video like Good Habits, how do you then link or critique this uneven cross-cultural dynamic to the idea of a nation? In all these three trilogies that we are about to see, the three silent films, Good Habits, Model Citizen, Good Habits, Hygiene, Swatch, and Birth Control.
I got very interested in eugenics. Actually, I was passing through New York a few years ago, and there's a very interesting show on the Eugenics Record Office, which is this notorious sort of government office, which was in fact shut down in the 1970s. And they were involved in, all kinds of census and records of people. And eugenics actually means it's a sort of pseudo science of good genetics. So there were two aspects to it. One was that this whole idea of the super, human or the perfect human, the ideal human, and where you're supposed to breed good humans and encourage good, perfect human beings to breed. The other part of it was various kinds of people were called subhuman. For example, people of other races, and that could even be Southern Europeans, like even Italians and Greeks could be called inferior races because they are dominant people, immigrants in America, for example, happen to be from Western Europe or Northern Europe. And of course, Black people, Asians, and people who are physically disabled, so on and so forth, criminals. So this was again very interesting for me because this, what you showed, the stills you showed earlier, photographs you showed earlier were from my ethnographic series and their anthropometric studies. I've recreated these anthropometric studies which were very popular in the 19th century. These Europeans went around the world, especially to their colonies, but also within their own cultures, measuring everything, measuring everything and measuring the human body. So there was phrenology, which was measuring the brain. And all of this was, besides the kind of so-called scientific thing of reason for it, was also to prove that the Caucasian race or the Aryan race was the most superior. Because, and of that, the perfect people in that, who are physically and mentally perfect. And in fact, strangely, apparently the hotbed of all this thinking was in America. And but the person who invented this term was a man called Francis Galton, who happened to be a kind of relative of Darwin. And he tried to base this thing of, he connected it to natural selection and the theory of evolution, which Darwin actually did not agree with his ideas. but it became extremely popular all over the world. In fact, the family planning, you know, this things in policy all over the world is based on basically eugenics.
Mm.
And, very, very problematic, you know.
Mm.
So from America, apparently it went to Germany, and where Hitler took it to, in the 30s, where Hitler took it to another kind of extreme,
Extreme, yeah.
started eliminating in a large way. While I think the worst things that happened in America, which are again extremely controversial, is forced sterilizations, for instance. Basically, all the victims would be poor people or even poor white people, you know, who couldn't understand what was going on, and somebody would say like, you know, this whole family is rotten and they all have to be sterilized. So mother, daughter, granddaughter, everybody would be sterilized. You know, where there'd be some kind of, you know, working class family or something. And of course, like the blacks and like, you know, even migrant Asians over there and so on and so forth. So I was just very, very interested in the whole thing, and I've started working. In fact, right now I've just started working on a project, because this whole thing of eugenics was a very wide sort of concept, which sort of illuminated so many things, you know, in terms of government policies and many things that go on. Like, for example, the whole migrant situation now, you know, who are these? Most of them are Dalits and Adivasis and OBCs. So, and the way they're being treated at that, and I think there's a very, there's a wider sort of a philosophical thing that is in the system, like, you know, which is very, very rotten, and it has to be sort of studied.
And I think in a way, by using religious iconography in Swatch and in birth control, you also link it to the ideas.
Mother India, it's not religious. You can see the flag.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Mother India. So we call her the mother, and that also links it to a kind of ethnic cleansing, or as you said, the idea of eugenics, and how uh, you're linking it to the different kind of issues, like you talked about the Gujarat riots, and I think in that sense you're also linking it on a wider scale to the politics and the political conditions right now in India.
Yeah, very obviously, yeah.
So we come to the last slide, and before I stop share, maybe you can just quickly tell us about the use of the tableau vivant, which is quite important in mostly all of your works. This frontality, where you create this intricate mise en scène, or the theatrical fourth wall.
Yeah, actually this is I was very, very nervous because I don't do live performance, but this is part of a very interesting project by a Bangalore artist called Suresh Kumar Gopal Reddy. So at that time I was living in more or less living partly in Delhi, and he had this project where this art project where he rented a place for a year in the center of town. It is a theater rehearsal space actually, and then he asked artists to contribute. So those who could contributed 2,000 rupees a month. So and others whatever they could, you know, younger artists and all that. So in return, we got 15 days in that space to do whatever we wanted. We could also invite other people. We could have talks. We could have exhibitions. We could have anything, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
there were something like 50 or 60 events that happened in that 1 year, which was basically more, organized by him. So I knew I was trying to I was being very lazy, and I was trying to postpone the whole thing. And mine was almost towards the end. And I said, shall I just give my time away to some other artists, because you could do that. And then I said, let me do something I've never done before, and let me do a performance. And, you know, for many years, I've been doing this whole project on Mother India,
Mm-hmm.
and the nation through the figure of you know, the goddess. I mean, goddess or whatever, the representation. And But I had for a long time, and that was not actually connected even to this, had this idea of using knitting, in some way, just for some reason. And then I got this very clear picture of myself dressed as Mother India knitting, and that too, you know. So I said, then I rang up my friend who's also a neighbor called Mamta Sagar, who's a well-known Kannada poet. I said, look, I got the space these 2 weeks, and I want to do a performance over there. And this is my idea, that I will be dressed as Mother India and I'll be knitting on stage. And then can you come up with some Kannada nationalist poetry, either of yours or other people's? And then we'll start working on that. So then she said, oh, that's so interesting, because she had done a PhD thesis on early Kannada poets, Kannada writers, Kannada women writers. And she said, oh, this is, the first nationalist Kannada writer was this woman called Nanjangood Thirumalamba. And she said she used to be a journalist and a writer, and she has run several sort of nationalist magazines and journals, and she used to be the editor as well. And so let's work on that. So basically, what we did was a half-hour kind of, it was like a kind of monologue, where Mamta is, I am very stylized and the set is very stylized. This set I got from Chandni Chowk, Kinari Bazaar. So they use it for Ramleela and all that. So it's, yeah, I was very nervous. My earlier ideas of doing a performance were that I'd be wandering around the people and doing something or the other. Then I can't, I get. So I said, let me formalize everything and have it very, very kind of structured. So it's like a stage. It's like a box stage. And so she brings me in there, and I just bless the people. I sit down over there, and I start knitting. Actually, here I'm taking out the knots. But that's all I do. I don't speak, and I don't even, pay any attention to her, and I'm just knitting or whatever, taking out the things. And why this knitting? In fact, that was very, very popular with the audience, because it took up so many associations. For me, it was that whole story about the French Revolution, where these women in the front and knit about the names of the men. But also, like, it's a colonial thing. Then it's warmth. It's a domestic thing, so on and so forth. But also red. It's it means history or knitting this country together. I don't know what she's doing, but it's open-ended, so you can interpret it in different ways, which is interesting, And, then she talks about this whole history and this figure of Bharat Mata, and then actual history of women in India and so on. The brief thing, sort of lecture. So that's what happened. And you were asking me about, I have a film documentation of this, and some people misinterpret my work, whether it's a photography or film, as a documentation of a performance. It's actually done for the camera, and there is no performance besides beyond the camera. While when you document it, it is basically a performance which is happening, live performance in front of an audience, documented. So there's no real editing, or there's no creative process happening in the video.
Right. So maybe now I can stop share and go on to, we have some questions from the audience members. Let me read out a few. Nandita Basak asks, what is the inspiration behind your choosing these mythological characters for your art practices? And have you ever wanted to shoot for magazine cover?
I think I've been talking a little bit about why I chose certain characters. So it's for a very specific reason. I mean, people actually have lots of different kinds of characters in my work, but people seem to notice only the few references to, say, Ravi Varma or to mythological characters. There are not many of them actually. But basically, they represent something that I want to, in a sense, reconstruct or something like that. What was the other part of the question? Sorry?
Do you ever want to shoot for a magazine cover? She may be.
I paid well. My work has been used for magazine covers and also book covers. It's
Right.
constantly being published actually.
Right. Sabrina Osborne asks, how do you feel about being compared to American artist Cindy Sherman and the inevitable comparisons?
No, I don't feel anything because I think it's a genre of work which many people are doing, and I'm very interested in feminist performance work, which has been happening since the 1960s at least. So I've even met some of the artists over there. So yeah, it's a continuum that is happening. But one thing I want to say is that actually in the 1990s when I started working, till I started doing this, actually I was doing sculpture. So I was completely disinterested in photography actually. Hardly interested in, I'm not interested in photography. It just happened by chance. And we didn't know very much about American art at all. In fact, our influences were more to do with Britain or maybe France or Europe, because many of the Indian artists have gone on scholarships to England, London particularly, or Paris. Maybe a few like to other countries like Mexico or like Yugoslavia or Poland or something like that. So in fact, in 1992, I was in New York, and I remember I was leaving 2 days later, and I wanted to go the day before and quickly see some shows and all that. And my friend Aisha Abraham, who I was staying with, said, there's also this. I was looking at only the sculpture shows. Huh? So she said, oh, there's this interesting photographer called Cindy Sherman. In fact, I'd forgotten all about this incident till very recently when I remember it. And must go and see her show. But I never did because I said, oh, photography and all that. And I was not interested at all. But later on, I realized that it was her quite very interesting body of work, where she uses the mannequins, which are very much very close to Hans Hofmann's work. So ideas are traveling everywhere. And I think in the 90s when I thought of doing this at all, I'd seen many artists all over the world using the performative photographs and all that, So it was something in the air, which was a possibility, I would say.
Sanjeev Sonpimpre asks, reference of Surpanakha comes and its relevance to today, does it not become utterly important to the coming up of historical reference to the happening of women's right to education and revolution starting with Phule Savitribai?
Sorry?
The reference of Surpanakha comes and its relevance to today, does it not then become utterly important to the coming up of historical reference to the happening of women's right to education and revolution starting with Phule Savitribai? I think Sanjeev kind of is referring to the idea of historical reference and then linking it to women's right to education and revolution, I think.
No, but how can I put it in that video? Like, I don't want it to be kind of, sometimes, yes, like some of my work is maybe very directly didactic. Like, for example, the good habits videos, which are very specific and very didactic in a sense. And some of my work, like even Paris Autumn, in a sense, talks about the race riots in Paris at that time. There's a reference to the earlier history of riots of the Protestants being persecuted, and later on, with the race issue that in 2005 when I was there, but in this particular work, I don't know how I can bring in everything. I mean, every work cannot have everything in it. I think you have to see the artist's work in its entirety to see what all it's addressing, and even then, I cannot address everything. Because you also have to find a strategy to say something interestingly, I mean, how does one talk about it? I mean, for example, I know that Shukla Sawant, for example, had an exhibition in which she did these very conceptual works. This was some years ago, where she does talk about, I think, either it's Savitribai Phule or some of these reformers and what was happening, But from the don't get anything about that whole thing. I have to go and read the books and whatever, you know. So I don't know. If I understand this question, I cannot bring in everything into one thing.
Right. Agumoni Shen asks, why do you aim at recreating characters?
Because I decided to perform them. It's not an aim, it's a device actually. My aim is not to just create a character, it's I create a character as a kind of device to say certain things or to debunk certain things. But there are also interesting characters which I myself enjoy. You know, it's not that there's no enjoyment in it. It's not like kind of a bitterly creating something. I don't know if I can do that, but it's sort of well. Even if I'm critical of that, it's the whole thing is very enjoyable because most of my work actually, more than the performance, is the production part of it, which is very, very elaborate. Can be very, very elaborate, and it's very, very enjoyable actually.
It kind of this last bit when you say you create characters, it kind of reminds me of Esteban Muniz's theory of disidentification, where the idea of performability and construction of identity then puts up the minoritarian subjects as against the majoritarian world. So that's an interesting thing. I think you also touch upon that in some series like the ethnographic series, and where we're taking up guys and underlining those ideas of.
I have to be very careful, you know, because I really want to be politically correct. I don't want to make. I mean, and in fact, I have been some. It can be criticized also, but I'm sure of it when I do it because I've thought about it carefully before doing that. Because being of a certain class and trying to be another class, and being of a certain like caste and trying to be another caste. But of course, one of my things is that it's enactment. And for example, if actors are doing it all the time. So are you saying that an actor can only play that whatever defines him in real life? But it's a fictional thing where you actually, by playing something completely different, you bring forward to the notice of people or society certain things that exist there. As I said, several of the things that I've been dealing with, people are not aware of, even I was not aware of. As I started, I became aware of them and started studying them, you know. And as I said, the latest thing is eugenics also, you know, which is a principle.
Right. I think with that, we'll come to the end of the session today. Thank you, Pushpamala, for a very enlightening talk. It was really engaging hearing you speak about so passionately about your practice. Richa, would you like to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm still stuck in some parts of the conversation which I'd love to talk to you about. But it's been a beautiful evening. Thank you so much for the entire session. I'm sure a lot of us have a lot of take home and a lot of food for thought. Thank you, Ushmita, for moderating such an interesting session for all of us. I think Ushmita has some announcements to make now.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions, one observation and one question that has just come in. Pushpamala, would you be comfortable answering this, or shall we leave it? Hello, Pushpamala, can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's one question that has come in. Would you feel comfortable answering it?
I'm fine. Can you hear me? It's frozen.
Self and the other. Is there a relation or contrast to you, or does something change in you after you play that character?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Because part of it, the screen froze. The first part of it. Just repeat the question.
How do you see the idea of self and the other in the characters you play? Is there a relation or contrast to you, or does something change in you after you play that character?
I mean, as I said, the performance is a very small part of my work. Usually the shoot is like, can you hear me? You're frozen? Ishmita?
Yeah, I'm back.
Suddenly froze, so I wondered.
Yeah.
Performances of any work is from one day, the actual shoot is from 1 day to 7 days maximum, even over a period of time. But while the production of it takes about months, and also I sometimes for years on end I'm reading or studying something before I actually do it. So I wouldn't say the performance per se changes me or whatever it is, but once I get interested in something, I start reading up about it and collecting material about it, and trying to research in every possible way, even talking to people or browsing, whatever it is, and that actually changes me, I would say, because it expands my consciousness of what the world is about. Like, for example, I was asked to do performance. I mean, I was asked to do a performance for my show in Goa, which of course everything is postponed, or now one doesn't know when it's going to happen. So I was planning to do a performance, and for that I started ordering books, reading up, making notes, and so on. It was to do with. I'm not stating it because it has to be a surprise, but finally, but I started reading all around that, and it was history, actually, 15th century history. So it's really sort of I didn't know any of that stuff. I never thought of any of that stuff. So everything is new, and I think you grow as a person, and so I wouldn't say a particular performance as such has changed me. But yes, one very key thing in which I was really shocked was the Toda image, in Native women, because till I came across the image of the Andaman Islander, which is the photograph which I created playing that character, which is a photograph by Maurice Portman. Again, anthropometric or eugenics, because even today there is a controversy about the Andamanese Islanders who recently killed this American missionary. So it's still a very, very kind of sensitive question. And when I saw that photograph, it immediately pulled me. I saw it in a book, a photography book on Indian photography, history of Indian photography, and I'd never come across this thing before. I didn't know anything about ethnography or these anthropological studies that had gone on and so on. So I started again reading up about that, and so I think that really sort of made me think very, about a lot of different things. And another very shocking thing was that eugenics, the show of eugenics that I saw, which interesting enough was also an art exhibition, and which was an immersive installation, they called it, using material from this eugenics record office. Absolutely, they were having performances, so I couldn't see the performances from the material there and all that. So they really brought that whole thing alive, and which is so relevant now with what's happening all over the world, even the kind of race riots and the race killing and riots and going on in America now. So it's something that's under, the society which keeps, becoming violently erupting, but it's always there, even if it's not so obvious, in the way society runs and politics happens and so on, and our own lives.
Right. So there's one observation from Roshan Sahani. He says, Pushpamala, just a comment, I find your sense of subversion, mocking, even self-mocking highly enjoyable. Is your jokiness a compulsive urge when you design your art project? It brings out a light of being all around us. We are witnessing an excess of stagey solemnity in art. So that's, I think, with that, we will come to the, I think with that, on that note, we will come to an end, but I do want to announce to our audience members that we will soon be back with the second edition of the Imami Art Mentorship Masterclass. Do keep a lookout for more information on that. Thank you, Pushpamala. It was an enlightening talk. Thank you for doing this. Richa, you keep coming and going. I guess your network is bad again.
Ushmita, would you like to share the dates of the mentorship program? So,
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
I will. The mentorship programs are towards the end of this month, 22nd to 25th of June, Monday to Thursday. We will follow the same time pattern that we have been following with most of our talks, that is 4 p.m. onwards. So please do keep a lookout, and we will also be emailing everybody who has joined us till date. Thank you everybody for joining in. Pushpamala,
Thank you.
again, a lot of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lovely to
Thank
be.
you. Lovely to have talked. Thank you to all our audience members. See you soon. Have a good evening. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.